Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast. I'm Romi, your host, and today I'm going to be facilitating a conversation about how teaching English in Argentina through a post-colonial lens will be extremely beneficial to me, as well as my students. I decided to utilize Mignolo's article from class about the invention of Latin America and think many ideas in this article are extremely important for my future endeavors. But first, it's important that I briefly introduce myself in order to gain better understanding of my teaching pedagogies and philosophies that I've developed. I am a white woman with European descent, born and raised here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Both my parents are New Mexico born and raised, my dad from Santa Fe and my mom from Las Vegas. However, I have no indigenous roots to the land and learned how to speak Spanish during a study abroad program in Spain. This is a fairly unique and privileged perspective to have. However, I plan to utilize my bilingualism for good and decolonialize my classroom given the ideas of Mignolo, as well as the material that we've learned in class. I just recently found out that I'm a Fulbright semi-finalist to be an English teaching assistant in Argentina alongside a professor in a university where I'll be assisting and facilitating conversations with my peers or other college students that are learning English. Given the knowledge bestowed upon me by Mignolo's article, as well as my cultural identity and real-life experiences, I hope to teach English in a way that is framed as a tool for communication rather than a superior language. Now let's talk a little bit about Mignolo's idea of Latin America, specifically Chapter 1, which we were assigned to read in class. However, I hope to read the entire book before I go to Argentina. In Mignolo's work, they discuss how the term Latin America came to be known in the 19th century, which aligned with Latin Europe and distanced it from its indigenous and African roots, even from just the name. Just by naming it Latin America, it reinforced European languages, sought to erase entire groups from existing. The text discusses that what was framed as discovery by Europeans was actually the invention of land that already existed and was inhabited by countless indigenous groups. However, if an indigenous group wanted to have history or continue to exist, they had to assimilate and be conquered and have their history be written in a Eurocentric manner. Whether it may be Spanish colonialism in Argentina or looking at English colonialism in what is now New Mexico, we can understand that language learning policies often prioritize colonial languages regardless, and it marginalizes indigenous tongues. A really important idea discussed within Mignolo's article is inspired by the works of Quijano, who inspired Mignolo, and that is the idea of colonial power, or coloniality of power. And it argues that colonialism imposed European languages as tools of control. Mignolo's ideas critique the very concept of language learning today because it's impossible to look at language learning without recognizing the historical and ongoing effects of coloniality. It's important to me as an educator to recognize the challenging hierarchies that have been embedded into educational practices since the very beginning. However, I hope to advocate for inclusion and inspire my students to not only learn English as a resource for success, but also a superpower. As Mignolo states, America then was never a continent waiting to be discovered. Rather, America as we know it was an invention forged in the process of European colonial history and the consolidation and expansion of the Western worldview and institutions. In reference to the difference between discovery and invention, the text states, "The first presupposes the triumphant European and imperial perspective on world history, an achievement that was described as modernity, while the second reflects the critical perspective of those who have been placed behind, who are expected to follow the ascending progress of a history to which they have the feeling of not belonging." I'm very grateful to understand the difference between invention and discovery and be able to carry this into my future teaching practices because I hope to be critical of the language hierarchies that have been enforced since the very beginning of our time and shape English and Spanish as tools for communication, but not superior languages by any means. Magnolo's ideas will help me acknowledge and navigate power dynamics of English as a global language and question what we've always thought to be true about English being the superior language. Magnolo's article really helped me understand how the educational system works today and why I would be a Fulbright scholar going to Argentina to assist in teaching English anyways, which is really fascinating, and it actually kind of has helped give me more purpose and motivation behind my teaching pedagogies, which has been fairly assuring. There's 3 things that I specifically gain more understanding on through reading Magnolo's work, and that is that colonialism created linguistic hierarchies, which I understood, but not as deeply as I do now. And it's been fascinating to kind of analyze how those hierarchies still affect our education system today. The hierarchies persist, whether that be Spanish or Portuguese, dominating formal education within Latin America, or English dominating our educational systems here within the United States, or Argentinian or Latin Americans' desire to learn English in order to access more resources and be more interconnected with the world around them. I think it's important to challenge these hierarchies within the classroom, especially given the position and cultural identity I possess, because as a teacher, these perspectives can drastically shape how your students are receptive to English education and how they view their English skills. Another idea that I've understood on a deeper level is how language has been used as a tool of cultural domination, whether that be within Latin America, erasing indigenous groups and assimilating them to Spanish and Portuguese, or if we're analyzing what is currently New Mexico through the lens of English colonization and the complete erasure of native groups and cultures. Come to better understand how colonizers were able to utilize an educational system in order to assimilate the conquered and fit them into boxes that were Eurocentric and, quote, civilized. English within schooling has historically been used as a tool of domination, and so I hope that given my knowledge from Magnolo's text, students can understand why they want to learn English and why it has been considered a global superpower and bolstered on such a pedestal due to colonialism. Educational systems have historically been utilized for tools of domination, whether that be through the Spanish language or the English language. Both have sought to erase indigenous, diverse cultures. Taking all of this into account, I hope to apply my newfound knowledge into my teaching practices through and through. I think that it's extremely important to see English as a tool for connection, but not a mark of intelligence or success. Too many times within my experiences in the New Mexico education system did I see students who were learning English as a second language be belittled or put down by teachers that labeled them as lesser or inferior for not knowing English, which is far from the truth. Being bilingual is such an incredible tool for success, and I think that it should be framed as such, especially in this day and age. I'm extremely passionate about acknowledging students' cultural and linguistic backgrounds, whether that be within New Mexico or my experiences in Argentina. Even just being mindful of the way that English is presented can entirely change a classroom environment. The last thing I want to be is some white woman with a savior complex coming to another country to bestow people with the knowledge that I possess in some sort of heroic manner. I understand that I may be perceived as literally representing linguistic colonialism just by virtue of being an English teacher. However, I hope that my awareness of the work of Mignolo can help me to engage with students in a more thoughtful and culturally competent manner. By recognizing, acknowledging, and understanding the complexities of colonial history and language, I feel as though I can create a more mutual learning environment where students feel empowered to discuss their own perspectives on language, identity, and colonial legacies. I feel as though I'm situated in an interesting crossroads between the coloniality of the English language in the US, as well as Spanish as a colonial language in Latin America. During my time in Argentina as a Fulbright scholar, I'll also have the opportunity to facilitate a supplemental project aside from my English teaching assistance. I hope to compare the effects of colonialism in modern-day New Mexico to the effects of Spanish colonialism in Argentina, whether that be on cultural aspects or educational aspects. I hope to gain a better understanding how we can leave it better than we found it. I already view multilingualism as a tool for empowerment, and the ideas within class have only reinforced that. Border thinking, which is a central idea to Mignolo's work, basically challenges the Eurocentric ways of knowing and Western knowledge systems shaped by colonialism. They've long positioned themselves as universal and superior, but border thinking emerges from people who live at the margins of dominant systems. I hope to facilitate conversations within the classroom, such as who decides what correct English is, and how people can exist between languages and cultures due to the ideas of border thinking introduced by Mignolo. As someone who's grown up in New Mexico my whole life, with the exception of being in Spain for a short amount of time, I'm all too familiar with what it's like to exist between languages and create a dialect without adopting one or the other. Spanglish is a completely legitimate way to communicate, and from someone who has known I know ha and orale my whole life, I hope to validate my students' learning environment and experiences in a way that they feel comfortable shaping their language learning experience in a way that suits them. By fostering a classroom that values multilingualism, acknowledges history, and encourages critical thinking about language, I hope to contribute to a more inclusive and equitable educational experience. Ultimately, I want my students to leave my classroom not just with English skills, but with a deeper understanding of language as a historical and cultural force. In doing so, I aim to challenge the lingering effects of colonialism in education and create a learning environment that truly honors students' identities.